Emma had always believed she understood pain. She had seen it in the sterile white corridors of the hospital where she'd worked for nearly a decade, had watched it flicker in the eyes of the terminally ill and twist the faces of accident victims. But the pain she carried now was different. It was quieter, heavier, and it clung to her like damp clothes in the winter, a constant, suffocating weight. It had been almost a year since the night of the fire, a year since she had woken up on the cold pavement outside her own apartment, coughing, choking, and screaming for the family she could no longer reach. A year since she'd felt the heat claw at her skin and heard the deafening collapse of a life she'd built with her own hands. She had survived physically, though the burns on her arms still tightened with every change in weather. But survival, she had learned, was not the same as living. She had moved to the edge of town after that, away from the two bright streets and the pitying looks of neighbors who whispered about the tragedy when they thought she couldn't hear. Her new home was small, the kind of place no one noticed. A narrow one-story house tucked between overgrown hedges and a strip of woodland that stretched for miles. It was quiet here, and quiet was what she thought she needed. She told herself she was healing, though healing often felt like simply existing. Days bled into one another, marked only by the sound of rain on the roof or the distant hum of a passing car. It was during one of those endless days, in the middle of a summer storm, that she first heard it. A sound so faint she thought at first it was just the wind in the trees. But then it came again, sharper this time, cutting through the steady drumming of rain. A bark, not the playful kind she sometimes heard from neighborhood pets, but a desperate, ragged sound, torn from a throat that had been crying far too long. Emma hesitated at the window, her fingers resting on the glass as she peered into the storm. Visibility was poor. The world outside was washed in shades of gray, rain blurring the outlines of the street. But then movement caught her eye, a dark shape near the edge of the flood-swollen ditch that bordered the woods. Something was struggling there, slipping in the mud, half submerged in the rushing water. She grabbed her raincoat without thinking. The air outside was thick and cold, each drop of rain stinging her skin as she made her way toward the sound. As she drew closer, the shape became clearer. A dog, a German shepherd, though he hardly looked like one at first glance. His fur was matted with mud and rain, his ribs stark beneath his coat. A chain hung from a collar around his neck, dragging in the water, tangled in the thick roots at the ditch's edge. He thrashed weakly, the current threatening to pull him under, each movement costing him more strength than he seemed to have. Emma's pulse quickened. She'd seen injured animals before, but something about this one made her chest ache. Maybe it was the way his eyes locked on hers through the storm, not wild, not entirely fearful, but pleading. She waded into the ditch, the cold water surging around her thighs. The chain was twisted tightly, biting into his neck. She tugged at it, fingers numb, murmuring soft words she wasn't even conscious of forming. "It's okay, I've got you, hang on." It took nearly 5 minutes to free him, and by the time she did, her clothes were soaked through and her hair plastered to her face. The dog collapsed against her, too weak to stand, his weight heavy and trembling. She half lifted, half dragged him to the slope and out of the water, where they both collapsed in the mud, gasping for air. He didn't run, even as she stood to leave, expecting him to dart back into the woods. He simply lay there, watching her with those deep, dark eyes. She took a step toward home. He tried to follow, stumbled, and nearly fell. That decided it. She scooped an arm under him, feeling the tremor of each shallow breath, and whispered, "All right, you're coming with me." Back inside, she wrapped him in old towels, the scent of wet fur filling the small kitchen. Up close, she could see just how bad his condition was. The raw skin where the chain had rubbed his neck, the deep gash along his flank, the patches of fur missing from what looked like months of neglect. His paws were swollen and cracked, and every movement seemed to cost him effort. Emma's hands moved on instinct, years of nursing training guiding her. She cleaned the wounds, working gently despite the mud that clung stubbornly to his fur. He didn't snap or growl, though his body flinched whenever she touched certain spots. Instead, he watched her, unblinking, as though trying to decide whether she was real. She found herself talking to him without realizing it, filling the silence with murmured reassurances and small, meaningless words. "You're safe now? No one's going to hurt you." Not anymore. She didn't name him that night. Naming him felt too much like claiming him, and she wasn't sure yet if he would even make it through the next few days. She let him sleep near the old wood stove, where the heat could chase away the damp. Every so often, he would twitch in his sleep, his paws moving as if he were running from something. She sat nearby, unable to shake the thought that maybe he had been. Over the next week, she saw small changes. He began eating more than just a few bites, lifting his head when she entered the room, even managing to follow her to the kitchen on unsteady legs. She caught herself smiling at him once, a real smile, and was startled by how foreign it felt. But the biggest change came on the 10th day, when she stepped outside to bring in the laundry and found him waiting at the door when she returned. He had never done that before, had always stayed curled in his corner as if afraid to take up space. Now he was there, tail giving the smallest uncertain wag, as though testing whether she'd push him away. She didn't. Instead, she reached down, and when her hand brushed his head, she felt the warmth of trust starting to take root. She named him Shadow, not just because of the way he followed her from room to room now, but because he seemed like a part of her own shadow, a quiet, constant presence, bound to her in ways neither of them fully understood. The wind had been sharp that morning, carrying the faint scent of rain and the bite of oncoming cold. In the distance, rooftops huddled together under a gray sky, the kind that made colors seem muted and time itself slow. On the far edge of town, where the streets grew quieter and the houses more weather-worn, there was a small, forgotten yard. Its fence leaned in places, its boards scarred by years of neglect. Behind that fence lived a life most had stopped noticing. He was a German shepherd once meant for greatness, strong bones, intelligent eyes, and a spirit that, years ago, had burned like a flame. But now, he was little more than a shadow of that promise. His name was Ranger, though few ever called him that anymore. Most people in the neighborhood didn't even know he had a name. He spent his days chained to a rusted post sunk deep into the hardened dirt. The chain clinked softly when he moved, a constant reminder of the invisible walls that held him as firmly as the wooden fence. His water bowl was often empty, overturned by wind or left to bake dry under the sun. The food he got was whatever was tossed to him, sometimes stale, sometimes not enough. But it wasn't hunger that hollowed him most, it was the slow erosion of hope. Every morning, the sound of children walking to school drifted down the street, laughter, the quick rhythm of sneakers on pavement, the rustle of backpacks. Ranger would lift his head, ears pricking slightly, only to lower them again when the footsteps passed without pause. No one came to see him, no one spoke his name. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small ember still glowed. He remembered the sound of a voice from long ago, warm, steady, full of affection. Good boy, Ranger. He remembered running across open grass, chasing a ball, the weight of a hand resting between his ears. He remembered belonging. That memory kept him alive. It was a quiet afternoon when something different happened. The street beyond the fence was empty except for a single figure moving slowly along the sidewalk. She was carrying a canvas tote, and her coat was too big for her small frame. Her hair, dark, with strands escaping from a messy braid, caught the occasional gust of wind. She looked like she was searching for something. When she reached the fence, she paused. Her eyes found Ranger instantly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Ranger stayed still, uncertain if this was another passerby who would only glance and walk on. But she didn't. She stepped closer, her hand lightly resting on the weathered wood. "Hey there," her voice was soft, almost unsure. "What's your name?" Ranger's ears flicked forward, the sound of her voice stirring something inside him. She waited, smiling faintly, as if she didn't mind the silence. When she noticed the empty water bowl, her expression shifted, not with pity, but with quiet concern. She crouched, slipping her tote off her shoulder, and pulled out a half-full water bottle. Twisting the cap, she poured carefully until the bowl brimmed. Ranger didn't move toward it immediately. He was watching her, not with suspicion, but with a cautious kind of hope. "It's okay," she murmured, pushing the bowl a little closer. "It's just water." Finally, he stepped forward. The chain rattled softly. He lowered his head, drinking deeply, while she stayed crouched, watching with that same steady patience. When he finished, she didn't reach for him right away. Instead, she sat cross-legged in the dirt a few feet away, speaking to him in a low, even tone. "You look like you've been waiting a long time," she said. "I'm sorry no one's been here for you." Her voice carried something rare, not the fleeting sympathy of strangers, but the weight of someone who truly understood what it meant to wait for kindness.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.